The woman in the snow looked more like a ghost than a living person. Her lips blue and trembling as Carter Crawford reined in his horse and stared down at her from beneath the brim of his frost-covered hat. The December wind howled across the Wyoming plains like a wounded animal, and he knew without checking his pocket watch that darkness would fall within the hour, bringing temperatures cold enough to kill. She was huddled against a boulder just off the trail between Springerville and the nearest ranch, her thin dress doing nothing to protect her from the brutal cold of 1881. And when she looked up at him with eyes that held more despair than hope, something in his chest twisted tight. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind. "Please help me." Carter dismounted without hesitation, pulling off his heavy sheepskin coat even as the cold bit through his flannel shirt. "Come with me," he said, wrapping the coat around her shaking shoulders. "I will keep you warm." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled, and he caught her before she could fall back into the snow. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 20 or 21, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now whipped around her pale face. Her dress had once been fine, made of green velvet that spoke of money and status, but it was torn at the hem and stained with mud and what looked like blood. "Can you ride?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She shook her head, her whole body trembling so violently he could feel it through his coat. Without another word, he lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady. She sagged against him, and he could feel her heart beating too fast, like a bird trapped in a cage. "What is your name?" he asked as he urged his horse forward, scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. The nearest town was too far, and his own ranch was a good 2 hours' ride in good weather. This was not good weather. "Violet," she managed through chattering teeth. "Violet Vaughn." "I am Carter Crawford," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady even as his mind raced through their options. "What happened to you, Miss Vaughn? Why are you out here alone?" She did not answer right away, and when she did, her voice was so quiet he had to lean down to hear her. "I ran. They were going to make me marry him, and I could not. I could not do it." He felt her start to cry silent tears that she tried to hide by turning her face into his shirt. Carter tightened his arm around her, feeling a surge of protective anger toward whoever had driven this woman out into a winter storm with nothing but a fancy dress and desperation. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that obscured the trail and made every familiar landmark look strange and hostile. Then he saw it, a dark shape against the white landscape that made relief flood through him. The old line shack was still standing, a small cabin that ranchers used during spring calving season. It would be basic, maybe not even stocked with firewood, but it had walls and a roof, and that was more than they had now. "Hold on," he said, urging his horse into a faster walk. Violet did not respond, and when he looked down he saw that her eyes were closed, her breathing too shallow. "Miss Vaughn, stay with me. We are almost there." Violet, her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Cold," she whispered. "I know, but you have to stay awake. Talk to me." "Tell me about yourself." He was saying anything now, desperate to keep her conscious as they covered the last 100 yards to the cabin. "Where are you from?" "Denver," she murmured. "My father owns a bank. He said I had to marry Richard Brennan, that it was all arranged. But Richard, he drinks, and when he drinks he gets mean. I saw him hit a woman once at a dance when he thought no one was looking. I told my father, but he said it was not my concern, that Richard would never treat his wife that way. But I knew he would." Carter reached the cabin and dismounted, then lifted Violet down, cradling her against his chest as he kicked open the door. The interior was dark and cold, but mercifully dry. He laid her on the single narrow cot in the corner, then moved quickly to check the small pot-bellied stove. Someone had left it stocked with kindling and a few logs, a blessing he did not take for granted. Within minutes he had a fire started, and he turned his attention back to Violet. She had stopped shaking, which was not a good sign. He had seen men die from cold before, and he knew that when the shivering stopped, it meant the body was giving up. He pulled off his gloves and touched her face, her skin icy beneath his fingers. "Violet, I need you to wake up now." He lifted her to a sitting position, ignoring her weak protests, and began to rub her arms and hands, trying to get her blood moving. "Come on, fight. You ran all this way, you cannot give up now." "Tired," she mumbled. "I know, but you have to stay awake a little longer." The fire was catching now, starting to throw real heat into the small space. Carter looked around the cabin, taking inventory. There was a single wool blanket on the cot, a shelf with some canned goods, a bucket, and not much else. He was going to have to share his body heat with her. There was no other way to warm her up fast enough. He sat on the cot beside her and pulled her onto his lap, wrapping the blanket around both of them and holding her close. She made a small sound of protest but did not pull away, and gradually he felt the rigid cold of her body start to ease. Her dress was still damp from the snow, and he knew she needed to get out of it, but that was a problem for when she was more conscious. For now he just held her, feeding the fire with his free hand and watching her face for signs of improvement. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice stronger than before. Her eyes were open, looking up at him with something like wonder. "You do not know me, I could be anyone." "You are someone who needed help," he said simply. "Out here, that is reason enough." She studied his face, and he wondered what she saw. He was 27, weathered from years of working cattle in all kinds of weather, with dark blonde hair that was too long because he could never be bothered to get it cut, and green eyes that his mother used to say could see right through a person's excuses. He was not handsome in any refined way, not like the city men she was probably used to, but he was honest and he worked hard, and he had never in his life turned away someone in need. "Thank you," she said softly. "I thought I was going to die out there. I ran from the train station in Springerville. I was so afraid they would find me and drag me back. I did not think about how far it was or what I would do when it got dark. I just ran." "How long were you out there?" "Since morning. I walked until I could not walk anymore, and then I just sat down. I thought it would be peaceful, freezing to death, like falling asleep." She shuddered, and this time it was not from cold. But it was not peaceful, it hurt. Carter felt that twist in his chest again, anger mixed with something he could not quite name. "You are safe now. Once this storm passes, I will take you wherever you want to go." "I do not have anywhere to go." Her voice broke on the words. "If I go back to Denver, my father will force me to marry Richard. If I stay here, I have no money, no way to support myself. I have never worked a day in my life, Carter. I can play the piano and speak French and embroider pillowcases, but I cannot do anything useful." "You can learn," he said. "And until you figure out what you want to do, you can stay at my ranch. I could use some help around the place, and my housekeeper is getting too old to manage everything on her own." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why would you do that for me?" "You do not know anything about me. I know you would rather freeze to death than marry a man who would hurt you," he said. "I know you are brave enough to run with nothing but the clothes on your back. That is enough for me." Tears filled her eyes and spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not have to thank me. Just get better and we will figure the rest out later." He shifted, settling her more comfortably against him. "Try to sleep if you can. I will keep watch." She nodded against his chest, and he felt her relax by degrees. her breathing evening out as exhaustion, and the warmth of the fire finally pulled her under. Carter sat there holding her as the storm raged outside, thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning, he had been heading into Springerville to pick up supplies, annoyed by the early snow and looking forward to getting home. Now he was sheltering in a lined shack with a woman he had never met before, and something told him that his life was about to change in ways he could not predict. He must have dozed off at some point, because he woke to find pale light filtering through the grimy window and the fire burned down to embers. Violet was still sleeping, her head on his shoulder, and for a moment he just looked at her. In sleep, with her face relaxed and peaceful, she was beautiful in a way that made his breath catch. It was not just her features, though those were fine enough, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked made for smiling. It was something about her, a quality he could not name but could feel, like standing in a shaft of sunlight after a long, cold night. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly, and when she saw him looking at her, color flooded her cheeks. "I am sorry, I did not mean to fall asleep on you." "You needed the rest," he said, easing her off his lap and standing to stretch his stiff muscles. "How do you feel?" "Better. Warmer." She looked down at herself, at her ruined dress and disheveled hair, and made a face. "I must look terrible. You look alive, which is what matters." He moved to the stove and added more wood, then checked the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. "We should be able to make it back to the ranch today. It is about 2 hours from here if the trails are not too bad." "Your ranch," she said slowly, as if testing the words. "You really meant it about letting me stay." "I do not say things I do not mean." He found the canned goods on the shelf and pulled down 2 tins of beans, not exactly a feast but better than nothing. "We should eat something before we head out. Do you think you can manage?" She nodded, and they sat together on the cot, eating cold beans with a shared spoon and not talking much. Carter found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing small things like the way she ate delicately, despite her obvious hunger, and the way she kept pushing her tangled hair back from her face with an unconscious grace. When they were done, she stood and tried to brush some of the dirt from her dress, a hopeless task that made her sigh. "I must look like something the cat dragged in," she said. "You look like someone who survived," he said, and meant it. "That is nothing to be ashamed of." They left the cabin after making sure the fire was fully out, and Carter lifted Violet onto his horse before mounting behind her. She settled against him more easily this time, as if the hours they had spent holding each other through the night had broken down some invisible barrier. As they rode, she told him more about her life in Denver, painting a picture of a world he had never known, full of fancy parties and strict social rules and expectations that felt like chains. "I was supposed to marry well and produce heirs and look pretty on my husband's arm," she said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "That was my entire purpose in life, according to my father. When I suggested I might want to do something else, he laughed. When I said I wanted to go to college, he said I was being ridiculous. Women do not need education, he told me. They need to be obedient and decorative." "Sounds lonely," Carter said. It was. She was quiet for a moment. "What about you? Tell me about your life." So he did, describing his ranch and the work that filled his days, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands and the peace of living close to the land. He told her about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, and taking over the ranch when he barely knew what he was doing, learning through trial and error and sheer stubborn determination. He told her about his housekeeper, Martha, who had been his mother's friend and who had stayed on after her death to help him keep the place running. "It sounds wonderful," Violet said wistfully. "Like you have a real purpose, something that matters." Every life has purpose, he said. Sometimes you just have to figure out what yours is. The ranch appeared in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind. It was not large by Wyoming standards, but it was well kept, with corrals and a barn and a house that his father had built with his own hands. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Carter felt the familiar sense of homecoming that never got old. Martha came out onto the porch as they rode up, her round face creased with worry that turned to confusion when she saw Violet. "Carter Crawford, where have you been? I was worried sick when you did not come home last night. And who is this?" "This is Violet Vaughn," Carter said, dismounting and then helping Violet down. "She had some trouble and needed help. I told her she could stay with us for a while." Martha's eyes went wide, but she recovered quickly, coming down the steps to take Violet's hands in hers. "You poor dear, you are frozen through. Come inside right now and let me get you warmed up properly. Carter, bring in some hot water for a bath. This girl needs to get out of those wet clothes before she catches her death." Violet looked overwhelmed by the sudden flurry of activity, but she let Martha lead her inside, looking back at Carter with an expression of gratitude and something else he could not quite read. He took care of his horse and then hauled water to heat, and by the time he carried the filled tub to the spare bedroom, Violet was wrapped in one of Martha's robes, her wet dress in a sad heap on the floor. "Thank you," she said when he set down the last bucket, "for everything." "You are welcome," he said, suddenly awkward in the face of her sincerity. "Martha will take good care of you. Rest as long as you need." He left her to her bath and went to find Martha, who was in the kitchen making bread and looking thoughtful. "That girl has a story," she said without preamble. "And I suspect it is not a happy one." "She was running from a forced marriage," Carter said, sitting down at the table and accepting the coffee Martha poured for him. "She almost died out in that storm. And you brought her here." Martha gave him a look he could not quite interpret. "That was kind of you, Carter, but what happens when whoever she was running from comes looking for her?" It was a question he had been trying not to think about. "I will deal with that if it happens. For now, she needs a safe place to stay. Can you find her some clothes? Something more practical than that dress." "I have some things that might fit her," Martha said. "She is taller than me, but we are about the same size otherwise. Poor thing, she looks like she has not had a real meal in days. I will make sure to feed her up." Violet emerged an hour later wearing one of Martha's plain cotton dresses, and with her hair braided neatly down her back. She looked younger somehow, less like the society girl she had been, and more like someone who belonged in this simpler world. Over dinner, a hearty stew that Martha served with fresh bread, she asked questions about the ranch and listened intently to Carter's explanations about the cattle and the horses and the rhythm of life in Wyoming. "Could I help?" she asked suddenly. "With the work, I mean. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Carter said, "but if you want to help, I am sure Martha could use an extra pair of hands." "I could teach you to cook and clean and mend," Martha said. "Useful things that will serve you well no matter where life takes you." So began a new routine. Violet threw herself into learning domestic skills with the same determination that had carried her through the storm. And Carter found himself looking forward to coming in from his work, to find her in the kitchen with flour on her nose, or hanging laundry on the line with red, chapped hands. She never complained, even when the work was hard or tedious, and slowly the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. Winter deepened, and with it came a kind of peace that Carter had not felt in years. Having Violet in the house changed things in ways both large and small. There was music now, because she would sing while she worked, old songs she had learned as a child. There was laughter, because she had a quick wit that caught him off guard and made Martha shake her head in amusement. And there was something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove and everything to do with the way Violet would smile at him across the dinner table, or the way their hands would brush when she passed him his coffee, or the way he caught himself thinking about her at odd moments throughout the day. He tried not to think too hard about what it meant. She had been through a trauma and she was still healing. The last thing she needed was him making things complicated with feelings she might not share. But it was getting harder to ignore the way his heart would speed up when he saw her, or the way he found excuses to be near her, or the way he wanted to know everything about her, from her favorite color to what made her laugh to what her dreams had been before they were crushed by other people's expectations. It was late January when everything changed. Carter had ridden out early to check on the cattle in the far pasture, and when he came back, he found a stranger's horse tied to the hitching post outside the house. Alarm shot through him, and he dismounted quickly, his hand going to the rifle in his saddle scabbard before he thought better of it. He did not want to walk into his own house armed like he was expecting trouble, even if that was exactly what he was expecting. Inside, he found Violet standing rigid in the middle of the parlor, her face white, while a well-dressed man in his 40s paced in front of the fireplace. The man turned when Carter entered, his expression a mixture of relief and anger. "You must be the cowboy who has been harboring my daughter," he said, his voice cold. "I am Violet Vaughn, and I am here to take Violet home." "I am not going with you." Violet's voice shook, but her chin was up, defiant. "I told you before, Father, I will not marry Richard Brennan." "You will do as you are told," Gerald said, his face reddening. "This foolishness has gone on long enough. You have embarrassed me in front of everyone who matters, running off like some common criminal. Richard has been very understanding about the whole situation, but his patience has limits." "I do not care about Richard's patience," Violet said. "I do not care about your embarrassment. I care about my life and what happens to it, and I am telling you I will not marry him." Gerald took a step toward her, his hand raised, and Carter moved without thinking, putting himself between father and daughter. "That is enough," he said quietly. "You will not threaten her in my home." "Your home?" Gerald's laugh was ugly. "You think because you gave her shelter for a few weeks, you have some claim to her. She is my daughter, and she will do what I say." "She is a grown woman who has made her choice," Carter said, "and I think you should leave. Not without Violet." Gerald reached around Carter, trying to grab his daughter's arm, and Carter caught his wrist, holding it firmly. "I said leave." For a long moment, they stood frozen, and Carter could see the calculations running behind Gerald's eyes. The older man was used to getting his way through money and influence. But those things did not work out here, in this place where a man was judged by his character and his actions, not the size of his bank account. "You are making a mistake, Violet," Gerald said finally, jerking his wrist free from Carter's grip. "If you stay here, you will have nothing. No money, no position, no future. Is that really what you want?" "I want to be free," Violet said, her voice steady now. "And if that means having nothing, then yes, that is what I want." Gerald stared at her for a long moment, and Carter saw something shift in his face, disappointment giving way to something harder and colder. "Then you are no daughter of mine. Do not come crying to me when this cowboy gets tired of you and throws you out." He left without another word, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Violet stood frozen, staring at the closed door, and then her legs gave out. Carter caught her before she could fall, lowering her into a chair and kneeling beside her. "He disowned me," she whispered. "He really disowned me." "You still have a home here," Carter said, "for as long as you want it." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and then she threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. "Thank you. Thank you for standing up for me. No one has ever done that before." He held her while she cried, and over her shoulder, he saw Martha standing in the kitchen doorway, watching them with knowing eyes. When Violet finally pulled back, wiping her face with her hands, Martha came in with tea and sat with them while the shock wore off and Violet began to process what had happened. "I am free," she said eventually, wonder creeping into her voice. "I am really free. He cannot make me do anything anymore." "What will you do?" Martha asked gently. Violet looked at Carter, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "I want to stay here if you will have me, not as a guest or a charity case, but as someone who earns her keep. I am getting better at cooking, and I can handle the chickens now without being afraid of them, and I am learning to sew and mend. I can be useful." "You are already useful," Carter said. "But if staying is what you want, then stay. You do not have to earn your place here, Violet. You already have it." Spring came slowly to Wyoming, the snow melting in patches and the world turning from white to brown to green. Violet had been with them for 4 months now, and Carter could no longer imagine the ranch without her. She had taken over most of the cooking from Martha, whose arthritis was getting worse, and she had learned to tend the chickens and the vegetable garden, and even to help with the smaller tasks around the ranch. More than that, she had become part of the fabric of their lives, as essential as the sunrise. He was in love with her. He had probably been in love with her since that first night in the line shack, when she had looked up at him with eyes full of desperation and trust. But he had kept it to himself, afraid that telling her would ruin the fragile peace they had built, afraid that she would feel obligated to return feelings she did not share out of gratitude for what he had done. But keeping it inside was getting harder. Every time she laughed at something he said, every time she touched his hand in passing, every time he caught her watching him with a soft expression on her face, he wanted to tell her. He wanted to tell her that she was the first thing he thought about when he woke up and the last thing before he slept, that her happiness mattered to him more than his own, that he would fight anyone who tried to hurt her and count himself lucky for the privilege. It was Martha who finally pushed him into action. "That girl is in love with you," she said one evening after Violet had gone to bed. "Anyone with eyes can see it, and unless I am very much mistaken, you feel the same way. So what are you waiting for?" "What if I am wrong?" Carter said. "What if she only sees me as someone who helped her, and telling her how I feel ruins everything? What if you are right, and you waste time you could be spending together because you are too scared to take a chance?" Martha countered. "Life is too short for that kind of foolishness, Carter. Tell her how you feel." He thought about it all night, lying awake and rehearsing what he might say. But when morning came and he saw Violet in the kitchen, her hair tied back with a ribbon and her sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough for bread, all his carefully prepared words flew out of his head. "Can we talk?" he asked, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. "Of course." "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. I just need to tell you something." He took off his hat and turned it in his hands, suddenly feeling like a green boy instead of a grown man. "I know you have been through a lot, and the last thing I want to do is make you uncomfortable. But I cannot keep this to myself anymore. I am in love with you, Violet. I have been for a while now. And if you do not feel the same way, that is fine. I will respect that. But I needed you to know." She stared at him, her hands frozen in the dough, and for a horrible moment he thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then a smile broke across her face like the sun coming out from behind clouds, and she laughed, a sound of pure joy. "You are in love with me," she said, coming around the table with her flour-covered hands held out in front of her. "Carter, I have been in love with you since you wrapped your coat around me and told me you would keep me warm. I thought you only saw me as someone you had to take care of, someone who needed your help. I never imagined you might feel the same way." He reached for her, pulling her close despite the flour that was now transferring to his shirt, and kissed her the way he had been wanting to kiss her for months. She melted against him, her arms going around his neck, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. "We are going to be covered in flour," she said, laughing. "I do not care." He kissed her again, softer this time, trying to pour everything he felt into it. "I love you, Violet. I want you to stay here not as my housekeeper or my guest, but as my wife if you will have me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." They were married in late May, in a small ceremony at the church in Springerville, with Martha as witness and half the town in attendance, because word had gotten around about the city girl who had run away from a forced marriage and found love with a cowboy. Violet wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, and Carter wore his best suit. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared made several of the older ladies in the congregation fan themselves and smile. The ranch became truly theirs after that, not just Carter's place where Violet happened to live, but a home they built together. She proved to have a good head for business, taking over the ranch accounts and finding ways to save money and increase profit that had never occurred to him. He taught her to ride, and though she never became an expert horsewoman, she was confident enough to ride out with him sometimes to check on the cattle, sitting beside him on a ridge and looking out over land that felt limitless. They talked about everything, from the small details of their days to their dreams for the future. Violet wanted to start a school in Springerville to teach children who might not otherwise have access to education. Carter wanted to expand the ranch, to build something that would last for generations. They planned and schemed and supported each other, and at night they would lie together in the bed they shared and marvel at how lucky they were to have found each other. Their first child came the following spring, a son they named Charles after Carter's father. Violet labored through the night with Martha attending her, and when Carter was finally allowed into the room and saw his wife holding their baby, both of them exhausted and perfect, he felt something in his chest expand so much it almost hurt. This was everything he had never known he wanted, a family of his own, a woman who loved him as much as he loved her, a future that stretched out bright with possibility. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Victoria, and watching Violet with both children, Carter thought about the woman he had found crying in the snow 5 years ago. She had been lost and broken, convinced she had no future worth living. Now she was confident and strong, a mother and a wife and a teacher because she had started that school she had dreamed of, holding classes in the church 3 days a week for any child who wanted to learn. "You ever regret it?" He asked her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set while their children played in the yard. "Running away, giving up everything you had." She looked at him, and the love in her eyes was so clear it took his breath away even after all this time. "I gave up a prison," she said. "And I found a home, I found you. How could I ever regret that? Your father," he said carefully, because it was a subject they rarely discussed. "Do you ever wish things had been different with him?" Violet was quiet for a moment, watching Charles help his little sister catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I wish he could have seen me as a person instead of a possession. I wish he could have wanted my happiness instead of his own prestige. But he made his choices, and I made mine, and I am at peace with that." It had been 5 years since Violet Vaughn had disowned his daughter, and they had heard nothing from him in all that time. As far as Carter knew, The man had gone through with forcing Richard Brennan to marry someone else, probably some other poor girl who did not have the courage or the opportunity to run. He hoped whoever she was, she had found some measure of happiness, but he did not waste much thought on it. His focus was on his own family, on the life he and Violet were building together. When Charles was 6 and Victoria was 4, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Violet, and the handwriting on the envelope made her hands shake. Carter stood beside her as she opened it, ready to burn it unread if that was what she wanted, but she took a deep breath and broke the seal. The letter was from her father's lawyer, informing her that Gerald Vaughn had died of a heart attack and that, having no other heirs, he had left his entire estate to her. It was a fortune, enough money to change their lives completely if they wanted it to. Violet read the letter twice, then handed it to Carter and walked outside. He found her by the garden, standing with her arms wrapped around herself. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I do not know what I feel," she said. "He spent years making me miserable, trying to control every aspect of my life. And now he is gone and I feel, I do not know. Empty, I suppose, like I should feel something more than I do." "You feel what you feel," Carter said, putting his arms around her. "There is no right or wrong way to grieve, even for someone who hurt you." "I do not think I am grieving," she said slowly. "I think I am just sad. Sad that we could never find a way to understand each other. Sad that he will never meet his grandchildren or see what I have built here. Sad that he died alone and bitter. What do you want to do about the money?" She turned to look at him, and he saw the moment when decision crystallized in her eyes. "I want to use it to help people. I want to build a real school with a proper building and books and supplies. I want to set up a fund to help women who need to escape situations like I did, to give them a safe place to go and the resources to start over. I want to do something good with it, something that would make him angry if he knew." Carter laughed, because that was so perfectly Violet, turning something painful into something useful. "Then that is what we will do." The school opened a year later, a beautiful building on the edge of Springerville with room for 30 students and living quarters for 2 teachers. Violet ran it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything she did, and within a few years, it had a reputation as one of the best schools in Wyoming. The fund she had set up helped dozens of women over the years, providing them with money for train tickets and temporary housing and job training, giving them the chance at a new life that Violet had been lucky enough to find. Their family grew too. After Victoria came another son, Daniel, and then another daughter, Margaret. The ranch prospered, expanding until it was one of the largest in the region, and Carter took on hired hands to help manage it all. But no matter how busy they got, he and Violet always made time for each other, stealing moments alone whenever they could, remembering what it had been like when it was just the two of them against the world. On their 10th anniversary, Carter took Violet back to the line shack where they had spent that first night together. It had been years since anyone had used it, and the roof was starting to sag, but the pot-bellied stove was still there, and the narrow cot where they had huddled together for warmth. "I was so scared that night," Violet said, running her hand along the rough wall. "Scared I was going to die, scared you would leave me, scared of what would happen if I survived. I could never have imagined that 10 years later I would be standing here with you, thinking about how lucky I am." "I was scared too," Carter admitted. "Scared I would not be able to keep you alive, scared I was making promises I could not keep. And then later I was scared to tell you I loved you, scared you would not feel the same way. We were both fools," she said, smiling at him, "but we were lucky fools." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her the way he had kissed her 1,000 times before, and it was still as powerful as that first kiss in the kitchen covered in flour. "I love you," he said. "I will always love you." "And I will always love you," she said. "My rescuer, my partner, my home." The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the changing of the seasons. Charles grew into a serious young man who wanted to take over the ranch someday, while Victoria showed her mother's passion for teaching and talked about going to college back east. Daniel was the dreamer of the family, always coming up with wild schemes and inventions, and Margaret was fierce and independent, already declaring at age 6 that she was never getting married because it seemed like too much trouble. Carter and Violet watched them all with pride and amusement, marveling at how quickly time moved and how full their lives had become. They had hard times too, because no life is without struggle. There were droughts that made them worry about the cattle, and a fever that swept through Springerville one winter and took several people they knew. There were arguments because they were both stubborn and passionate, and sometimes they disagreed about the right way to handle things. But through it all, there was love, the kind of love that had been forged in a snowstorm and tempered by time, strong enough to weather anything. Carter would sometimes wake in the night and watch Violet sleeping beside him, her auburn hair now streaked with gray and her face marked by smile lines, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. He thought about the woman he had found crying in the snow, desperate and afraid, and the man he had been then, lonely without even knowing it. They had saved each other that day in ways that went far beyond physical rescue. They had given each other a reason to hope, a reason to fight for something better, a reason to believe in love. By the time they celebrated their 25th anniversary, their children were grown. Charles had indeed taken over much of the ranch management, proving himself to be even better at it than his father. Victoria had gone to college and come back to teach at her mother's school, bringing new ideas and methods that Violet embraced enthusiastically. Daniel had moved to Cheyenne to work as an engineer for the railroad, sending long letters home about his adventures. And Margaret had started a newspaper in Springerville, much to everyone's surprise, writing articles that challenged injustice and made people think. "We did good," Violet said one evening as she and Carter sat on their porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. "Look at them, Carter. Look at what we raised. Strong, independent, thoughtful people who care about making the world better. We did good." "We did," he agreed, taking her hand and lacing his fingers through hers. "But I think they got that from you. You were the one who showed them that you could come from nothing and build something beautiful. You were the one who taught them to fight for what they believed in." "I did not come from nothing," she said. "I came from you, from that moment when you wrapped your coat around me and told me you would keep me warm. That was when my real life started." "Mine too," he said softly. "I just did not know it yet." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and Carter thought about all the sunsets they had watched together over the years. How many more would they have? He was 52 now, and Violet was 46, and if they were lucky, they had years ahead of them still. But even if they did not, even if this was one of their last sunsets together, he would not change a single thing about the life they had built. The next morning brought news that made them both laugh and shake their heads in wonder. Charles arrived at breakfast with a young woman on his arm, a rancher's daughter from the next county over, and announced that they were engaged. Victoria followed him in with her own news, that she had been offered a position at a teacher's college in Colorado and was thinking about taking it. Daniel's latest letter had mentioned meeting someone special. Even Margaret, who had sworn off marriage forever, had been spending a lot of time with the new deputy in town. "They are all leaving us," Violet said, but she was smiling. When did they get old enough to have their own lives? About the same time we got old enough to be grandparents, Carter said, because Charles's fiancée was already expecting, a fact that would be announced at dinner that evening. Are you ready for that? I am ready for whatever comes, she said, as long as you are beside me. The grandchildren came, as grandchildren do, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and chaos that delighted both Carter and Violet. They were less strict as grandparents than they had been as parents, letting the children get away with things that would have earned their own kids a stern talking to. Carter taught them to ride and rope, while Violet read to them and taught them songs and filled their heads with stories. It was a golden time, busy and exhausting and absolutely perfect. When Carter turned 60, Violet threw him a party that brought together everyone they knew. The house was full of family and friends, and as he looked around at all the faces, some young and some old but all dear to him, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what a life well lived looked like. Not measured in money or status or power, but in connections forged and love given and received. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Violet found him standing outside, looking up at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "About that day in the snow," he said. "About how close we came to never having any of this. If I had taken a different trail, if the storm had been worse, if 1,000 little things had been different, we would never have met. And my life would have been so much smaller. But we did meet," she said. "And we have had 28 years together, and with any luck we will have many more. Do not waste time thinking about what might not have been, Carter. Be here now with me." He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, and felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. She was correct, as she usually was. The past was done and the future was uncertain, but this moment, standing under the stars with the woman he loved, was perfect. They had 15 more years together after that night. Good years, for the most part, though age brought its inevitable challenges. Carter's joints grew stiff and Violet's eyesight started to fail, but they adapted, helping each other through the difficulties with patience and humor. They sold most of the ranch to Charles, keeping just the house and a few acres, and spent their time spoiling their ever-growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Violet continued to oversee her school until she was 70, finally stepping down when her health made it too difficult to keep up with the demands. The town threw her a celebration that lasted 2 days, and person after person stood up to talk about how she had changed their lives, how her teaching or her fund or just her example had given them hope and opportunities they would never have had otherwise. Carter sat in the front row and listened to it all, his heart swelling with pride. This woman, his woman, had taken the worst moment of her life and used it as fuel to make the world better. She had never let bitterness or fear stop her from being generous and kind. She was, he thought, the best person he had ever known, and he was grateful every single day that she had chosen to spend her life with him. When Carter was 75 and Violet was 69, he woke one morning to find her still sleeping later than usual. He was about to wake her when he realized that her chest was not rising and falling, that the hand he held was cool and still. She had died in her sleep, peacefully and without pain, slipping away so quietly that he had not even known she was gone. The grief was crushing. For days he could barely function, going through the motions of the funeral and the burial in a daze. All their children came home, gathering around him and trying to comfort him, but nothing helped. The house felt empty without her, the world less bright, and he did not know how to exist in a reality where Violet was not there. It was Margaret who finally got through to him, sitting beside him on the porch and taking his hand. "Mom would not want you to give up," she said gently. She would want you to keep living, to find joy where you can, to remember all the good times and be grateful for them. You had 43 years together, Dad. That is more than most people get. Do not waste whatever time you have left wishing for more. Celebrate what you had. He tried. He really did. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about Violet and keeping her memory alive. He went through her things slowly, touching the dresses she had worn and the books she had loved and the letters she had saved from when they were first married. He visited her grave every day, talking to her about his day and about the family and about how much he missed her. But the truth was, without Violet, he was only half himself. They had been together for so long, had become so entwined, that living without her felt like trying to breathe with only one lung. He grew thinner and quieter, and though he never said it out loud, his children knew he was fading. 6 months after Violet's death, Carter died in his sleep, just as she had. His children found him in the morning, peaceful in his bed, and though they grieved, they also understood. He had lived a long, full life, had loved deeply and been loved in return, and when it was time to go, he had gone on his own terms. They buried him next to Violet, under a tree they had planted together years ago. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line that Margaret had chosen. 2 souls, 1 heart. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passing from Charles to his children and then to theirs. The school that Violet had built still stood, though it had been expanded and modernized over the years. The fund she had started still helped women in need, grown now into a full organization with paid staff and a board of directors. And the story of how it all began, of a cowboy who found a girl crying in the snow and offered her warmth and hope, was passed down through the family like a precious heirloom. Because it was not just a story about rescue or survival. It was a story about love, the kind of love that changes everything, that gives you the courage to become who you were always meant to be. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about finding home in another person's arms. It was a story about 2 people who had been lost and broken, and who had found each other in the middle of a snowstorm and decided to build something beautiful together. And it was a story that deserved to be remembered, celebrated, and cherished for all the days to come.